Thank you. All right, so I'm waiting for my fearless partner to hop in here. Today, we're going to talk to you about our OT security product, ultimately go through a demonstration, and Heidi is really going to introduce us to kind of really what's going on right now. Why are we talking about this? At the end of the day, why does it matter? And what can we do to help you out? There you go.
I don't have a clicker.
There you go.
Okay. Oh, I got the clicker now. Okay. So, obviously, already messed it up. Forward. There we go. Let's do some introductions first, though. So I'm glad we have a small group. This will open up some conversation here. My name is Heidi Horn. I am the VP of, actually, title now is Healthcare Marketing Strategy at Nuvolo. Been with Nuvolo for about 2.5 years, and prior to coming to Nuvolo, I actually was one of you. So 20 years I spent a large health system running a large HCM organization, had about 110 technicians and staff reporting up to me, doing what you're doing every day. So came to Nuvolo, and we'll talk about who Nuvolo is, what we do, but been working with them ever since, helping them develop the product, working on the marketing side, obviously, customer success, and making sure that they understand, from my experiences, and from Dustin's going to introduce himself, he also comes from a TCM background, making sure that the organization is truly building a product that meets the needs of the HCM industry, your day-to-day life, whether it's support, product, whatever it might be. So you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dustin Smith. I'm an advisory solution consultant with Nuvolo. I am currently a CHTM. My background, been with Nuvolo a little over 1.5 years now. Prior to that, I spent about 14 years with Intermountain Healthcare. Had the privilege of working with BJ and Summer. And my big focus has always been operations, business intelligence, and business process. And at one point in time, I got to really work with BJ around cybersecurity and some of the ways that we can ultimately mitigate our risk and understand risk to organizations. So I like to think I have a little bit of credibility, emphasis on little. I've never really turned a wrench, but at the end of the day, a huge piece of this industry is about making a plan and executing on it. And one of the things that we're really going to introduce within our product is you don't always have to be a cybersecurity expert to help out. And so we'll cover that a little bit more later on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Heidi.
All right, so I just want to give you a brief description about Nuvolo. We are a private organization, been around since 2013. We're built on the ServiceNow platform. And so for many of you, you might be familiar with ServiceNow from your IT department. The reason that's important is it's highly configurable, integratable, if that's a word, and it allows you to do a lot of different things with the solution from a configuration versus customization standpoint. We are Nuvolo's Connected Workplace for Healthcare, is what we call our suite of products, our solution. Provides an integrated cloud-based application for full lifecycle management of clinical and facilities assets. What that means is we are a CMMS kind of hopped up on a lot of different capabilities. So whether we're an enterprise asset management system mixed in with an integrated workplace management system, also known as a CMMS. And so we have all of this and then some. And we'll talk a little bit about this. And the OT security solution is that and some part of it. We have 400 plus employees and growing rapidly. So, I need to update this probably because it's probably up to 500 by this point in time. And we're also international, so we're very proud of that. We have, offices in all of these different places. But most importantly, and I really do believe this sincerely, is that we are a very strong commitment to supporting the healthcare, especially the HCM community. We have dedicated healthcare teams. Dustin and I are just one of many people in the organization that have come from a healthcare background. And so Nuvolo recognizes that you can have software programmers and you can have customer support people. They don't understand the business. So they don't understand the regulations of what you're doing. The steps that you guys have to go through, what your technicians are dealing with, what you're dealing with at the C-suite level. We're not going to meet your full potential. Or let's just say we're not going to meet our full potential for helping you guys out. We have over 100 healthcare providers clients representing 2,000, almost 2,000 hospitals now. So we're growing very, very rapidly, and we like to think, the reason it's point that is that we're one of the best. So we also have, again, very, very important, is active involvement in healthcare technology management associations to keep your pulse on the client needs, your needs, make sure that we are up to date on what those latest regulations are. As you know, regulations change all the time. CMS comes out with new things. What is 100% PM completion now, or AEN, or whatever that might be. So I'm actually an Amy board member. I'm the chair of the ABTMC Technology Management Council. I'm on multiple subcommittees with the TMC, a standardization team, promoting the CVS certification and certification team. Actually worked with the CMMS collaborative that is looking at standardizing codes. So, between the folks in Nuvolo, we definitely keep our pulse on what's going on in the industry. And again, very proud of this one. That is why I threw it in there. We're the first company to provide funding, which was $10,000, to help hospitals participate in the BMED apprenticeship program. Because we're recognizing that there's a shortage of BMEDs out there. We're looking for ways to find, there's a shortage of schools that are providing training. The Amy BMED apprenticeship program is a great way to, obviously hire and train your future BMEDs. So if you haven't seen that already and you're interested in finding out how to get your hands on that money, come see me after the fact, and I'll talk to you about what that program means.
Yep.
Okay. So, this is again a program we're very proud of.
Oh.
And what happened there? What did I do?
I just played Dustin. Worked for me for years.
Okay.
It's true. When anything fails, it's my fault.
Yeah. Dustin, why don't you just hit the click? I don't know if it's this thing. Just go to the next one. Okay, stop it. Okay, so I'm going to set this up for Dustin. So this is a current situation, and I think you probably might look very familiar to all of you. If you've had a cyber threat, a cyber attack, whatever it might be, this probably looks familiar. So let's say if you're lucky enough to have an OT, passive OT monitoring tool, a medical device network monitoring tool, and it identifies, hey, something's going on. And it might identify this is going on with this IP or MAC address. And it goes to your IT department, and they're looking at it, but they have no clue what device is this? Where is it located? Who supports it? Is it delivering, something right now? They leave chemo? What is the impact? Can I put a firewall up? They just have no idea. Can I block the port? They have no idea what's going on with that particular device. It's just a number that's coming across. Okay. Meanwhile, you got the HTM department down here who are, they're going about their day. They haven't even been alerted to the fact that anything is going on with one of their devices, and the clock starts ticking. Next slide. And this is usually what happens. Then there's something going on, mayhem, everyone's crazy, running around, starts yelling, eventually we figure out it has something to do with the medical device. Everyone's panicking, where is it, what's it doing, what device is it? And that's the end result. Does this look familiar to some of you? Have any of you experienced something like this? Show of hands, maybe. Guys, a lot of heads nodding. Yeah, it's like, calming, I myself, lived through WannaCry and a couple of those other ones, and I never want to go through that again. So I'm going to set the stage. So now Dustin's going to kind of tell you, this is what happens now. Dustin, go to the next slide, please. So he's going to set up and kind of talk to you about what the Nuvolo OT security solution does and why just having a passive monitoring tool, your network is not, that's one tool or toolbox, but ours is the tool that you need. So you want your clicker back?
Sure.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. So just out of curiosity, who has a formal cybersecurity program in their organization? Okay, I'm hoping, okay, good. So we're definitely taking steps in the right direction. So the next question is, how many of you have a pre-procurement process that basically goes through and evaluates the information associated with MDS squared forms? Okay, it's a little rough, you know? And so with that being said, who actually understands the risk you have within your organization and who's adequately measuring that? Mike Powers says yes. Explain that to me. Why is that?
Why do I understand the risk and what I'm exposing things to?
Yep. And how do you quantify it?
I'd probably say it's a lot, but not as much as code and quantity. I reached out to most of my vendor partners and asked for some of this kind of data. Just, hey, give me a list of operating systems, more to start with. And some of the operating systems that came back were not contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
And to have just that sort of 50,000 foot view and go, hey, I know where my old unsupported equipment is, I know which facilities that's in, and then if a step would need to be taken to mitigate a risk. I've got some great people on our team that I can lean into, and they be able to help.
Okay, so I think it's fair to say that Intermountain Healthcare has taken a phenomenal step in the right direction. One of the things that I think is immensely difficult is, again, how do you quantify it? All right, because once we start quantifying our risk, then we have a measurement, we have that chalk line, and we can start improving from there. So what we've actually newly put out within our OT security module is the ability to go through and take the information that you're gathering from MDS squared forms and also internal documentation about your environment and understanding findings. What are the risks before we bring a model on that we ultimately need to take care of? And so I've gone into a risk assessment, and this is ultimately for a Baxter infusion pump. And as I'm going through and associating these findings, I also have a list of different controls and configurations I can put in place. Okay, so what's interesting about this, when you think about all of the passive monitoring solutions, it's really after the fact. You've already put something in your environment. You have information going over the network. You've got a system to ingest that information from the packets because you can't actively scan your environment. You don't want to tip over medical devices. So again, it's very important to realize this is proactive. You're not going to get this from a passive monitoring solution. You can take these steps and understand the mitigating controls you want to put in place before the device comes in. So this is slick. I think when it comes to your total program, it's really important to understand what can we do beforehand to reduce our risk. And then when, unfortunately, the oh shit happens screen that Heidi showed,
I did not say.
you have a solution in place where you can actually go through and take the appropriate action. So we've got an introduction to the risk assessments, and we've seen kind of where it starts. Well, let's take it one step further. Okay, you've done a risk assessment. You know which models it applies for. What about your existing inventory? Okay, because some of us we haven't done this work. That's the biggest issue with cybersecurity. It's all net new. Intermountain Healthcare has 3 FTEs dedicated to this, unless you've expanded the team. But that's not enough to go fix these issues. So the question then becomes, how do we set this up where we have clinical engineers or BMETs? How do we give them the tools to go through and resolve these issues? Because Matt and Summer are likely going to go through with Intermountain, and they're going to make a plan of action, but they're not going to be able to go hit every site within the organization to actually execute those plans, to put in place those mitigating controls. So once we've mapped this to a particular model, we can map it to a very specific software version if needed. And then really we push this down to specific devices where we have a device specific security lifecycle profile. Okay, so again, going down to quantified risk, I can see here my base risk score and my residual risk score upon closure of the work orders that I'm going to show you in just a moment that have the mitigating controls in place. I'm able to watch this ideally go to zero, unless there's a certain threshold of risk that you're willing to take on as an organization. So I've associated it to the device. Then I'm able to push it to work orders. Here, if I wanted to, I could actually execute this, which is another critical step. We don't want to overwhelm our techs. I think everybody who here has Alaris pumps. Okay, so how long's that recall been outstanding? Okay, so seriously, well, okay, the bezel assemblies, right? So when we think about it, if we had gone through and created work orders, and one of the biggest benefits of Nuvolo is you're looking for automation. And so we're likely to put in place automated assignment rules. If the day that recall came out, when you got that notification, if you created all of those recall work orders, a portion of them are still outstanding. You want to stress out your engineers? It's seriously, throw 300, 400, 500 work orders on top of them that aren't going to close for 3 or 4 years. That's how you stress out an engineer, you know? Okay, so that's why this step is critical. But once we've gone through it and we've actually generated this, again, individuals like Summer and Matt, people that understand cybersecurity, they need to be able to relay the instructions to the individuals that are actually going to perform the work. So here I have a task on a work order that says configure port 80. I don't know what that means. I'm not technical. Okay, BJ will say this all day long. So what we've established is a way for you to put in place procedures that individuals can easily follow so they don't need that level of expertise. So from here, awesome. So what it'll have is it'll have multiple steps in place that any technician can follow. So again, you're able to leverage those additional resources, and there's no need to have that cybersecurity expertise, because again, with all of this being net new work, it's critical that we leverage the resources we have today. And with that in mind, when you move to a modern system that has certain levels of automation, how are you going to make the justification? Okay. When we need to, because there's certain CMMSs out there, I'll stop calling out certain groups, but maybe your CMMS is free. Okay. Nuvolo's not free. So when you think about a modern platform, you need to be able to understand, where am I generating the cost savings, and how do I redeploy resources when I'm introducing really any efficiencies so that I don't lose FTEs. Cybersecurity, we're all taking on risk today. I think Mike ultimately alluded to it, and it's important for us to understand the risk. So get the numbers in terms of that risk assessment, have those scores in place, and then we can start having the conversation about how we resolve them. So now I'm going back to kind of the reactive process. What happens after we've introduced different devices into our environment and the passive monitoring solution actually identifies them, and there's particular threats or vulnerabilities out there? So this is our OT security management dashboard. I'm going to step through really the visuals that assist us in understanding where we're at in our environment, and then also kind of that triaging process. So up top, I really have my threats and vulnerabilities. I have an understanding of what security events have been created for these threats and vulnerabilities and what's still active, and then even what's come over from different passive monitoring solutions. So why would I have multiple passive monitoring solutions? Well, I'm glad Dustin asked himself. We're going through a ton of M&A right now. And so when you pick up another organization, a couple of things are going to happen. A, there's going to be this moment of panic. Who's kind of bigger and in charge, and they're likely to start spreading a standardization effort. But when it comes to the deployment of a passive monitoring solution, if you can simply plug it into your existing system and have two, that's going to assist you in that transitional process. All right, information's identified. Let's see a security event and let's talk about it. What do we ultimately do with this? So within your passive monitoring solution, it's basically saying, here's the devices that are impacted, here's what it is, and ultimately you want resolution and you want to know, what the hell is this? A MAC ID is not going to be helpful to the BMET1 that's working out in the shop in a rural facility. Odds are they're not 100% sure what that MAC ID is. But if we were able to identify a serial number or add the contextual information, if we can tell that engineer it's an MP5, they know what an MP5 is. Yes?
Is that information given to the equipment?
Yeah, how much of it is the passive monitoring solution actually going to gather though? Because that's one of the biggest problems. It all depends on what's passed through the packet. And then from there, depending on which OEM it was, there's certain information that unfortunately just isn't in the packet.
But yeah, you may get serial number in the packet, you may not.
Yep.
And with a demo look like this, yeah. You get this, but more times than not, having them packet it helps us for a number of years. Serial number.
Yep. But with that in mind, okay, so how often is model showing up, BJ, with your solution?
I'm showing up okay.
Okay.
And with our solution, we're doing better. It's about how you set it up, right? How you see what's coming across it. Most of these solutions, and a bunch of them are in the room, it's how they conceive your network. And if they have the visibility, then that's their prospect. Right? It's
Definitely.
making sure that their product is.
So at the end of the day, what's really important is, okay, at the bare minimum, we should be doing the best we can to put our serial number and our MAC address into our device records, okay? Because those two are going to be the largest primary keys that yields the biggest benefit from a connection with a passive monitoring supplier, because that's where you're going to get that rich context. Because there's the information that your passive monitoring supplier actually, they have, which is beneficial. And then there's what your techs have actually put together. And what this is doing is it's really joining that. So to illustrate that, I've got this match of a particular vulnerability. And again, this is Joe Blow's MP5 out in the middle of nowhere. Well, now I can actually issue a work order to this particular vulnerability and they can go resolve it. But let's go into the device record. And from here, I like to talk about crossing the chasm, okay? Because really this is a module within Nuvolo. Here's the information right in front of us that we've actually taken down from our passive monitoring solution. And so this is where I start to understand what is the operating system. If the information came across, what software revision number am I rocking? And we can actually start to leverage that information to better handle not only our threats and vulnerabilities, but in addition to this, we can also start better managing our recalls. That's a huge ancillary benefit that I don't think is often talked about enough. A good portion of recalls may be specific to a certain software revision number. And again, the goal here is let's operate efficiently. We don't want to create unnecessary work orders.
I think one thing you have to solution the data integrity, right? So instead of having Joe Blow out there with the MP5 putting in that information, whether it's could possibly get human error coming right off the net, right? So the data integrity is a big piece, especially for Intermountain Healthcare and the systems we have. Our data integrity is one of our things that we struggle with, right? And by eating it from the network, somebody, it's pretty tough to mess that up, right? It's coming right across the back.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say, I want to give you an example of that you probably can relate to. You know, when you, like how many people have had a PAX issue or, Epic or Cerner issue, and you're like, I need to contact somebody in IT, but I don't know who does that. You know, I'm sure you can all relate to, like, I don't know who to contact for this issue I'm having that is affecting, HCM operations and everything else. By the same token, when IT gets this sort of thing, they're getting the IP address, the MAC address. They don't know who in HCM is supposed to respond. And so that takes time. They're going to have to hunt it down, again, if they don't know where location's at. And so the other thing it does, it matches up who is assigned to that equipment. And so that you can have that rapid remediation or, that rapid response to it. So that's, again, another key point I just want to make sure we're pointing out. And that takes time. And you think about, on the reverse side, when you're looking for somebody on the IT side to do that for you and how long it takes, they're having the same issue.
Thanks, Heidi. Okay, so going back through, let's go back and continue on to really our dashboard. As we continue through here, we start to understand, okay, what are the device vulnerabilities by manufacturer? What are they by asset type? And also, what's open out there? And again, this is important because we have limited resources, and so we're not going to be able to respond to everything. But we do want to understand what's still out there and what risk we're taking on as an organization. And so I can keep these open and I can manage them and simply watch them for visibility purposes, but our boots on the ground don't have to worry about it. So we're not creating unnecessary stress within the organization. Continuing on, unfortunately, we're not going to have all serial numbers and MACs in the system. Well, I pray to God you actually have all serial numbers, but not your MAC addresses. And with that in mind, there's going to be certain information that tries to match, and there's nothing available. And so these are going to be newly discovered devices. And what will occur is we'll actually create a pending verification work order. And within one of these work orders, I can actually go through and I can evaluate whether or not this is an existing device within our inventory. For instance, here I have a location, I have our asset type, and from here I can either create a new device or I can tie it into what I've identified as an existing device. And so this gives us better visibility and I can better manage my inventory. The other piece of it as well is it helps us to start thinking about our operations. For instance, what's going on at our Buenos Aires satellite facility? Why do they continue to have newly discovered devices? Well, do we have in place, a good example is, how are we managing our after-hour rentals? Do we have some way to quickly add these to inventory and have them identified so that if Joint Commission or DMV happens to show up the next day, this isn't an untagged device? Or do we at a bare minimum have a policy in place that says we are relying on the rental provider? And if anything comes up with that particular device, we're off the hook, So again, the goal is let's have visibility and then we can start building out really our operations to better manage this. And that's really our dashboard. So now let's get into some of the nuts and bolts. How does this thing work? And what are some of the additional tools that we have in place that can really help you out? We have our queues. This is really just data exchange. I don't think it's extremely valuable to talk about. Our identification rules though, this is critical. So when you think about the information coming through, you want to make sure as you're adding rich context in kind of both directions, because we can always send information back to your passive monitoring solution, you want to match that has integrity. So we can't use IP simply because of DHCP. A MAC address is going to be a high fidelity. Also, our serial number is high fidelity. But we've gone through and done this work for you. We've created the order of fidelity so that we're always getting those appropriate matches, and we understand the situations where we don't want to add that context to devices. And then from there, you've put in a tremendous amount of work in ensuring that your asset inventory is appropriate. Well, at some point in time, information is going to come across the system that's different. For instance, in this situation, if I'm getting certain asset type information from my passive monitoring solution and there's a mismatch, I want to be able to understand that mismatch and create a rule for that data so that it's always appropriate coming in. I only want to see that issue once, and then I want to set up a rule. In this situation, from a simile, it tells me this particular device is of the type blood glucose monitoring system. I want to go through and look in my inventory and see what the asset type I always want that match to go to. So you're able to, again, ensure the cleanliness of your inventory while you're obtaining that rich context. Yeah.
Is there an ability to set alerts where you have gaps in naming or some sort of field that you've identified as a customer? This is a really critical field that we want to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Have that alert bubble up to say, hey, I've got 10 of these I need to solve this particular problem on.
Yeah, I mean, for that particular example where I'm simply looking for, we'll say device records, but it would function very similar within work orders. I'm just looking, I create a report where I'm looking for a null value on the device record. And I'd be able to pull that information out. And I could also, if that's a report that I want run at periodic intervals, I can schedule a distribution of that report to different groups as desired. Good question. So continuing on, we went over our risk assessments, and that's really our security lifecycle profiles. From here, another area where we're trying to think about how do we spread the wealth of knowledge, or what can we do to make this easier? And one area we've identified is certain organizations are going to want to review the information that comes through from their passive monitoring solution and possibly rescore it at a device level, because the information coming across from the CVSS, it may be different within your environment. So you may want to go modify that score, especially when we think about the risk we're willing to take on. So with that in mind, we've developed our asset vulnerability score, and I can change these. And one of the larger benefits of this is we've incorporated a tremendous amount of metadata so that you don't have to, you can be a newer cybersecurity tech and you're going to be able to read this and make some sense of it. Okay, it's not going to replace training, but it gives you an understanding of how this is defined. So when you're able, even as a newer tech, you may be able to make these changes based on your environment. Continuing on, we're also able to go through and create CVS Score Overrides. So if, for instance, you always want an ultrasound to be a particular score, you can create those overrides in advance, and whenever it comes in, it's going to slate into that scoring. And you can do this by model, a specific device, or even certain networks. So is this making sense to everybody? Okay. Going back to the question, Mike, about kind of quantifying it, do you think this would help Intermountain Healthcare quantify their risk? Sure. Okay. What questions do we have out there? I mean, I really flew through the demo so that hopefully we can figure out what you guys want to see or what everyone in the room would like to talk about.
How are you getting that risk?
Okay, so how's Nuvolo getting that risk score? Well, I can tell you right now, risk score is a very, very overloaded term. So we got to be careful about how we use it. So your risk score, as it pertains to like criticality, for instance, is something that's set at the model level more often than not. And if you want to override it at the device, you can. As far as a security risk score, as it pertains to cybersecurity, a lot of times that'll come actually over across from your passive monitoring solution. So that's another one. And then you've also got the CVS score that oftentimes will come from like the NVD. What else have we got out there?
The way that you score the outcomes of, we're all looking to reduce labor intensity, right? This doesn't solve for necessarily the mitigation that we've got to do when we identify these problems, right? But potentially this reduces the admin and synthesizes the data so that when somebody goes, they're making more meaningful mitigation efforts, right?
Yeah.
So do you have a way that you're quantifying to show a program, hey, you implemented this, here's what was happening, or here's how much your labor has gotten effective in your hours, identifying, mitigating. Are you also tracking or have the ability to track those mitigation efforts and show outcomes?
Yeah.
I know over time my program got that. I got, I reduced my risk, my labor got better.
Definitely. So that's an excellent question. And my answer, unfortunately, is going to be fairly complex, and it's also very dependent upon the organization that we're talking to. So when it comes to measuring the reduction in work that we're able to introduce through automation, a lot of that depends on what baseline do you have and how are you measuring your workloads today. In the context of cybersecurity, the real problem with it is nobody knows where they are right now. And I realize that's a blanket statement. It's probably largely inappropriate, but I still feel fairly confident in that because none of us have gone through and mitigated all of our risk, and we never will. So with that in mind, it's really difficult to articulate that baseline within the context of cybersecurity, but within the context of everything else, if you understand what your workload, so a great example is automated assignment, right? So depending on the way your PMs are assigned, if you have a certain supervisor that has to go through, we'll say on the 5th of each month and ensure everything's appropriately assigned, upon implementation, we're going to completely eliminate all those hours. And so it's simply understanding all of the shops within your organization and how many hours each supervisor is doing, is how much time they're spending. And that's a conversation that we will likely have kind of during a selling motion to be able to understand your benefit. As far as tracking it, though, I don't know where those hours would have been tracked, so, which is unfortunate because it leaves us in an ambiguous situation where it's difficult to justify dollars. But at the same time, we all run into this issue all day, every day. I think everybody in this room at some point in time has had a conversation with either your technicians or your peers saying, I didn't have time to complete my work orders, or I didn't put all of my hours on my work orders because I was too busy. I closed them out. I half-assed it, right? And the issue with that is now we don't have that representation of the actual workload. And so we can't justify FTEs. And it's one of the biggest problems we all have is documentation is hard, which sounds kind of crazy, but it really is. And it's not that it's immensely difficult to fill in these particular fields, but the issue with it is it's not the biggest priority because we're trying to protect patients here. And we're trying to ensure that our patients are well taken care of. And so our focus is ensuring these devices are available and in good condition. And that's the priority. So again, complex, fairly long-winded answer, but I hope that helps to some extent.
It's the baseline that's the hardest part to get.
Yeah.
We can track how much time it takes after the fact, but understanding what it was baseline, is very, very difficult.
What else we got?
Dustin, you told me a few minutes ago, you said I can create risk scores based on IP segment.
So you can go through, let's go back to our overrides. Yep. So here I've got IP network overrides. So whenever we go through and we're identifying certain information that's coming from the passive monitoring supplier, we're actually going to set up a network adapter that's associated with a device. And the reason behind that is because you may have a wireless network adapter, and then you've also got one that's hardwired. And so you've got two associated with one device. And we want to be able to track that connection and then override it at a very specific level of design.
I was wondering if it's possible to create one, because maybe I set up a segmented network. And I say, okay, this address scheme is my segmented network, so I want the score to be lower, because I know it doesn't have access to the internet.
Yeah.
Is that possible with this group? I love throwing these at you.
Yeah. Thanks,
Till
BJ.
it breaks.
You asked.
So I believe it is, but it's something I will definitely get back to you on, BJ.
I think it would be beneficial for everybody in here if you have the ability to do that. It'll definitely help. If you have mitigating controls in place, we'll look and say, hey, you already got those mitigating controls, and we'll put that in here so you can change those scores. There's nothing worse than my team. They get one team.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How many, you get one new 0-day vulnerability comes out, you got 100,000 hits, right? It's like,
Yep.
you don't fight through that. But if I can say 75 of those behind a firewall that I don't have to worry about, or I get less than the score of that.
So that's a super interesting question too, because when we think about this, we're creating a feedback loop, right? Because as we put in place certain mitigating controls or if a vulnerability comes through, we issue work orders and we address those particular issues, odds are the next time a packet comes through from that device, the issue is resolved. And so the question is, do we want to actively send back the resolution to the passive monitoring supplier, or do we want to wait until the packet gets sent through and they realize it's resolved, right? So in your situation where we'll say we did the risk assessment up front and we know we want to put it behind the VLAN, the interesting part is I don't know that we'd even need to put in place an override, because we've taken the appropriate steps and we've implemented our mitigating controls so that we wouldn't need to put in place an override because we wouldn't have the issue. You know what I mean? I'm still going to answer the question. It's critical. Yeah, but that's one of the cool things about this is that whole feedback loop. Like as we continue, as we resolve these, we should see them drop off our passive monitoring solutions list, because we've ultimately taken care of those issues. And the next time the packet comes through, like a lot of times there's a change. Not every time, but a good portion of the time. Great question. Thank you, BJ. No, it's seriously, it really is a good question.
So this security part, sorry, I'm like asking more questions, but does it like integrate? Because it's not telling Switch what to do. Does it integrate with like an app solution? Is that how you guys are doing that, or does it actually?
So it's a good question, and where that kind of comes into play is, where do you want those hooks to reside and who ultimately owns it? Because again, one of the biggest issues with cybersecurity is we're all trying to figure out who the appropriate players are and triaging that workload. I don't know that an integration with your NAC would make the most sense from a Nuvolo perspective, so much as your passive monitoring solution being there. You know what I mean?
It does.
Okay. Yeah, no, so we do have an open API. It's something we can integrate with almost anything. It's a matter of time, money, and the biggest question is value. And I think that's where a lot of individuals get hung up. They talk about the time and money piece. Value is ultimately what we're all looking for. How can we get the most value out of anything?
So tell me about somebody like me with 3 employees, how's this tool gonna help? Really?
Yeah,
Getting employees from my list is pretty tough. Always.
You're being so cute, Mike.
yeah. No,
How's this tool gonna assist me?
yep.
Because I have limited number.
Yeah, exactly. So what this is going to do is it's serving as that ingestion engine. If you can get Mike's teams of boots on the ground to incorporate the MAC address and you're able to hook up Armis to this, then from there, what's ultimately occurring is any time there's a match that comes from Armis to a particular device, Summer and Matt are able to come in, sorry, your cybersecurity engineers are able to come in here and see this match. So what we have right here is those 2 devices that were impacted by a particular issue, and then they review that issue, understand is there an opportunity to remediate, and then they can actually create work orders. And so when I create that work order, because I've set up those automated assignment rules, we'll say you've got one facility that's up in the northern part of Utah and then another down in the southern part of Utah. Well, your central group residing in the middle of Utah, they're not the ones going to resolve that. It's the boots on the ground that are already performing the PMs on these 2 devices.
PMs are assigned to those groups, so that call's gonna be automatically routed.
Oftentimes, it's one of the biggest benefits of Nuvolo is automated assignment. And so that's something that we almost always set up on implementation, because the goal here is do more with less, let the technology work for you.
Can we review the remediation work order?
Yeah. So when we create this work order, the cybersecurity technicians or information coming from the passive monitoring solution is ultimately going to be stored in the header so that there's an understanding of what work needs to be done. And that's with a particular security event for really a threat or a vulnerability. The procedure I had referred to while going through the risk assessment, that's down, instead of being in the header, it's a task associated with a work order. And the reason behind that is because to set up the mitigating controls on a particular device, you may end up involving multiple parties and you may have multiple tasks associated with that work order before all the controls are in place.
So, like, I cannot read from screen, like, what would be?
Yeah, make it smaller.
Yeah, we were looking at that when we started. So it comes down to, again, like what information you want to put in the case of like a vulnerability or a threat. This remediation, for instance, it says check all exception flows. That's not what I'd put for like a baseline technician, but does that help? Like, you understand?
So basically we create a remediation or Nuvolo will automatically generate based on the vulnerability.
It depends. So if that information comes over from the passive monitoring solution, the remediation steps, then that would be incorporated. But if it's not coming over, then really, yep. Great question.
So think about the high-tech act that was just modified.
Mm-hmm.
It says if you can prove that you're using best practices, this would be a good way to document grouping. Hey, this is the issue, this is how we remediated it, this is how it aligns with best practice. This sort of a bolt-on slice seems to me to speak to documenting that compliance. Am I in the right ballpark?
Yes. And I mean, that's our thoughts exactly. And it's one of those, we're really trying to, we would like to see almost the entire market on this, because the other piece of it is, well, I mean, I'm a sales guy, like I'm required to say this, but at the end of the day, what's interesting to think about, so we have AMI standards coming out, and we've been talking about data governance and data standards across the industry for as long as I've been in. And we keep talking, but we're not always moving. But if we can continue to get more individuals on a singular platform, why can't we start like creating an industry standard? And so the justification for this can be like really the High Tech Act. I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't be. And the beauty of it all is the more of us that get on as far as peers, it opens up really the community where we can start sharing with each other. And we can do that within the context of Nuvolo, or we can do it outside of the context of Nuvolo. I mean, think of the individuals in this room. Like, you can talk to any of these people, and you can do that with or without me present.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
How much data is this able to go out and pull, outside of what you're asking a customer to give you? Like, let's say customer doesn't have all their MDS2 or MDS squared data. They need it. They want it.
Mhm.
They're asking the vendors for it, and some can get it to them easier. Others, not. They've got to hunt for it. Take a big organization that's got many, many documents like that they need. How much is this able to go out and request and pull that data for a customer?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question. As of right now, that's still a manual process, but it is something that we are talking about, and we go through quarterly releases, and really that vendor like discovery kind of process, trying to reach out, that is something that we're talking about. But the difficulty with it is when you think about every vendor out there and being able to get that MDS squared form information, how do you know who to reach out to? And as far as having,
That's what the customer goes through.
yeah, oh yeah, no, for sure.
Who to call and how to get it.
But with that in mind, I think it's difficult to it'd be tough to put that in a system to handle that ask, but it is something that we're conceptually talking about today because it's a common issue. And I mean, what'd be beautiful is if we had like a perfect central repository, but I don't know that anybody has that right now. If somebody does, please let me know so we can make an integration partnership.
I think we had one more slide too for the PowerPoint, so there was other questions, and then we also have a Q&A at the end.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have a Q&A at the end too, so this isn't the end of the questions, but I did want to kind of wrap this up in a nice little tidy bow for you here. So, we talked about one thing we call Nuvolo CMMS because that's what you guys understand, computerized maintenance management system, but it really is so much more than just maintenance management. And, and that's because that's what you do today. You don't do just maintenance anymore. You do contract management, you do vendor management, you do OT security, you do, project. When I did a study of my team a few years ago to find out how much time they're spending on projects, it was over 20% of their time is spent on projects. It's not just maintenance anymore, and yet probably your FTE count in a lot of cases is based on how many work orders you have or how many devices you have or whatever. You go back to that old formula, I can't even remember what you're supposed to have one BMET for every 1,500 devices and things. So that doesn't even apply anymore because they're spending all this time doing non-maintenance related work. And so, Nuvolo recognizes that there's all this synergies between all these different groups that are working together. And it's not just about maintenance anymore. So we obviously have our clinical and facilities maintenance, as we call it, our product. But that is looking at, work, not only the asset management and the work order management, but we have mobile work orders, clinician self-service, contract management involved in that, vendor management, dashboards for analytics, all those things. And you can see, you can't see it. I realize it's really small now. We'll have, if you have questions, we can come up later. Put your nose on the screen. The OT security, we've already done a lot of talk about. Space and New is another module. So you can see this whole thing is part of the Nuvolo's Connected Workplace for for healthcare. But again, when you are doing projects, whether it's a master facility project or looking at, who's gonna, how many ORs we're gonna have, we're gonna move something here, something there, office space, whatever the case might be. The space and move module also works with this, the rest of these modules. Real estate is another important aspect of things that we've introduced. So a real estate module. And then projects, and I kind of mentioned that. So again, all of these things work together, and it all gets back to data transformation. You keep hearing about data transformation. And what we're trying to get to is we have one solution that kind of does it all. The other thing I want to just point out and that we do that I think really sets us apart from some of our the other CMMS providers is the ability to transfer tickets. So, and that's where that connected workplace comes in. So how many times have you gotten, as an HDM organization, a call from the nurse that says, my patient monitor's down because I'm not getting data from my EMR. And, you troubleshoot it, you figure it out, and it's like, well, that's really an IT issue. And that's something, right now you probably have to say, well, call the IT department. Tell them that, or you have to call the IT department. And so this allows you to transfer those tickets, those work orders between facilities, between IT, between, to another HDM department, whatever the case might be, so that, again, the right people are, resolving the issue. So I don't want to spend a lot of time because I know we're at time, but I did want to point out that this is, OT security is one piece of our overall connected workplace. And again, that's what sets Nuvolo apart. So any questions about that? And you can go to the next slide. We have Q&A at the end. So any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you for your time
Thanks,
today.
everyone.
And appreciate it.